All right, I'd like to call the February 23rd Town Council work session mid-year.
Okay. Call the meeting to order. Oh,
Back in.
bring the meeting back into order. Brian, if you'd like to take charge.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Mayor, members of council. We appreciate this opportunity to come to you tonight and kind of provide you with a mid-year budget report. What we're going to do is you actually have lots of handouts. All these are available also through the online agenda as well. We're going to walk you through our through a PowerPoint presentation, but you have a couple handouts that go along with that just blow up the slide so that you can see it a little bit better. That's one of the things. Basically, what we're going to do to start off this evening is we actually want to make sure that we're speaking the same language. So we're going to kind of go through some of the definitions of things that we constantly are saying and talking about at either council meetings or work sessions or finance committee meetings. We want to make sure everybody's on the same page as far as, oh, that's what you're talking about, when we're talking about various different reports, various different terminology. Then after that, Sherry is going to kind of walk you through an explanation of the report, so to speak. And then we'll dive kind of into the profit loss report and look at the critical areas that we're mostly concerned about. We'll talk about overall concerns as well. And then the staff has prepared some solutions and proposals for how we're going to address these. We'll talk about our next steps, and then kind of we'll transition to what the next fiscal budget will look like. And we provide you a handout with that, which has the proposed revenues, just revenues at this point. We don't have the whole entire budget together, but it'll be the forecast and basically what is the process going to be. So that, unless there's any questions about this.
Just a quick question. How recent are these numbers?
The profit loss report, Sherry, I believe, was done yesterday, as of yesterday. So we're going to jump into some terminology here. And I don't want to make it seem like we're going back to basics, but it doesn't hurt to go back to basics. So what we're going to talk about is basically what is a budget? And that's one of the things we want to kind of address first. A budget is basically an estimate of costs, revenues, and resources over a period of time, fiscal year. For us, it's July to June. There are other organizations that operate in different times. Some go on a calendar year. Some I just heard recently of an organization starts their fiscal year in September. I had never heard that before, but I guess you really could start at any time. It's basically a 12-month period usually. But
federal government's October.
That's true. That's true. Anyway, it's reflecting a reading of the future financial conditions and goals. For us, it is one of our most important administrative tools that we can use. A budget serves also as a plan of action for achieving quantified objectives, a standard for measuring the performance of the organization, and as well as a device for coping for foreseeable adverse situations. A lot of times we get talking about the difference, kind of like what's the difference between general reserve versus what's the difference of the reserve. I'm going to kind of comment to it with regard to the general definition, but also how we utilize it here in Haymarket. The general reserve is basically utilized as a budgeting tool. What we do is we retain any earnings from the town's profits during the fiscal year, and these earnings are saved to offset any potential future losses within the fiscal year. So, for example, a great example this year is recently here in February in January when we had the large snowstorm. You can predict, but a lot of times it's hard because we're not in an area that gets a good amount of snow every single year. The previous year, we got a lot of little snow squalls. It was just enough to make it a mess, but not enough to really blow your budget for snow plowing. Because if it's not much more than 2 inches, you're not going to drop a plow on a parking lot. This year, we ended up with almost 2 feet. So, once again, it's one of those things you can't predict, but you basically create a general reserve within the budget to basically compensate for any of those kind of unexpected expenses. The reserve Well, the reserve is kind of done the same way, except the reserve is money that's set aside. It's, I would encourage you to think of it as almost like our rainy day fund, okay? In our personal accounts, we have savings, or you might have like a set aside amount in money market or some other some other account. Use that as an emergency fund. That's when the hot water heater blows or something to that effect. That's what towns and that's what jurisdictions do. They basically have a reserve. However, the reserve is normally not reflected in your budget, and the reason being is your budget's your active tool. That's almost like working with your checkbook. That's like, you know, that's the plan on how we're going to spend things. You don't plan on what to spend your reserve. So we typically, in most cases, you set that aside literally in a different location. Funds are set aside for emergency or other future needs. These funds may be placed within an interest-bearing account, but it should be handled in a non-aggressive interest-bearing manner, meaning that it's okay to grow the reserve, but the whole point is we're not in this to just be surging ahead with revenues, but the idea is if you're growing it, it's kind of the tortoise. If you ever read the story of the tortoise and the hare, the tortoise wins that race every single time. So we just want that just kind of slowly growing, and it maintains our reserve. And then our current fiscal policy, it's important to understand, we actually said and stated and took a vote on that we would actually maintain 30% of our general fund in a reserve. Now, currently, we have about $300-some thousand, a little bit more, now due to interest in our Virginia investment pool. I've been encouraging finance and been encouraging council to think of that as a reserve. Now, that's not 30%, but we do have 30% total in cash on hand, and that's how we're looking at it. And moving forward, as we get into, I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, I'm hoping to actually just move all of that over to the Virginia investment pool and count that as our reserve.
Brian, correct
Yes.
me if I'm wrong, but I believe 30% works out to roughly 600,000
That's correct, under the current budget.
under the current budget. So
Yep.
we have 600,000 not in the budget,
Liquid.
set aside, fairly liquid, that could be tapped in an emergency.
That's correct. I'm going to turn it over to Sherry now, and she's going to kind of talk about accrual versus cash basis and a few other definitions.
Good evening. We are on page 4 of your handout. I have explained in the past accrual versus cash basis. The town does run its reporting in accrual basis, which means it accounts for revenue expense when they are incurred, not when received. Cash basis does the opposite, which is it's right when you receive it and right when you pay it out. So I've shown you some examples of the town's revenue and accrual basis. For example, the real estate tax bills. When you see on the profit and loss that whole $298,000, that just means we billed it out. It doesn't mean we received it all in yet until the due date. Another example is the Public Service Corporation bills and the tenant rent invoices. When these invoices are input into our accounting system, it appears as if we received the money when in fact it's only that they've been billed. And those are examples of that. There are some receivables that only show the money that is received when it is entered into the accounting system. In other words, we don't know how much it is until we get it. And so those items are meals tax, cigarette tax, communications tax, sales tax, etc. When you see those numbers in there, that means we have that money. We're going to move to the balance sheet. The balance sheet is just a financial statement summarizing the town's assets, liabilities, and equities. It shows the town's financial position, the net worth of the town. Basically a snapshot showing what is owned and owed by the town. And we've provided you a balance sheet.
And the reserve would be in that.
The reserve is in,
Well, not on the profit and loss, it is.
not on
in
the
balance
profit and
sheet.
loss. It's shown with all of the accounts that we have, like the Fauquier Bank, all of the money we have in Fauquier Bank and Sona Bank. Our reserve is in those accounts.
Well, we did, we also discussed, as Brian mentioned, if we could get it into the VIP all at once, then it would be fairly obvious that you would know that that would be your reserve
Right.
or your rainy day fund. Be easier to point to. Right now, you have to figure out exactly where it is.
Yeah, the balance sheet almost serves as a collective whole of what all we have.
If you move on to the assets on the balance sheet, that includes all the town's bank accounts, balances, accounts receivable balances, and other assets, also fixed assets, which are property, buildings, vehicles, and land that the town owns. So those are our assets. Our liabilities would be our outstanding payables, all the fringe benefits, security and escrow deposits, and other liabilities. And then we also have long-term liabilities, which would include employees' accrued leave, accrued interest in accounts payable, and our general obligation bonds. And then, of course, our equities would include investments and capital assets, unrestricted net assets, restricted net assets. And some of these items will be our fire funds and proffers, et cetera. Any questions on the balance sheet? Okay. P&L statement. The profit and loss statement is basically our checkbook, so to speak. This is money in, money out. You write checks for payments due, and you receive money and deposit it. This will show you the town's financial performance and position. Generally, it means revenue minus expense equals profit.
Hopefully.
Hopefully. Any questions on the P&L? Okay. So I think we're just going to run through the P&L now, correct?
Is there any questions like the profit and loss versus the balance sheet? In the past, we actually have, and this has even been with this council and with actually with previous councils, we used to include both the balance sheet and the profit and loss statement. A lot of times what we found historically is that they get like kind of mixed up together. And so that's the reason why we kind of eventually just dropped down to like, let's just provide the P&L statement within the agenda packets. We'll get to that a little bit later, but we are looking at, we're willing to continue to figure out what are better ways for us to report, and we have some ideas about that. So.
I had a question about 66, the rental income, 6630 Jefferson Street. Why are they only at 47.9%, and all the other ones are they behind? Or they?
They're not behind. There has been several new lease negotiations.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so they've come down a little on the lease.
Okay.
And we're going to actually go through the P&L statement.
Oh, we are. Okay.
Yeah, almost section by section. And if you look at the handouts you have, you'll notice there's a slew of handouts at the end. They'll be tied to the PowerPoint presentation. I actually would say it's probably going to be easier for you all to look off these, but we wanted to provide them to you because it provides a little bit clearer. And they're highlighted as to what area. So, with that being said, are there any other questions about the profit and loss versus the balance sheet? And if you come up with something after the fact, that's why we're here. Yep, that's why we're here. Okay, so we're going to talk about revenues first. And if you look at the slide, you can understand why I blew it off.
It's a little blurry.
Yeah, just a tad. So mainly
Does
because
everybody
that's an image of it.
have that handout in front of them? So basically, we just wanted to highlight some things and explain how this money does come in. I talked about the real estate, which is billed one time annually, which is why you see the full amount. So that's in October and also public service. And I also wanted to show you in other local taxes how we receive this money. So you see that sales tax, meals tax, and utility tax come in monthly, but bank stock tax and business license is once a year at certain times of year. So you're not going to see that revenue till later in the year. The penalties include business license, meals tax, rent penalties, et cetera. And then, of course, the cigarette tax does come in monthly as well. And most of these, as you can see, are coming in at and above budget, what we've budgeted for revenue for those. Permits and fees are a little harder to budget for, but we try to base it on upcoming developments and projects. And as you can see, we're way over revenue on that. The inspection fees are just inspections. The other planning is site plan fees and permit fees. application fees are like zoning permit applications, and the motor vehicle license are the decals we sell. The fines and forfeitures are what comes from the police, court monies. That is not the citations and accident reports. That is actual,
Adjudicated fines, yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
Do you have anything to add to that?
If you-
We get all of that, or does the court take a cut?
The court does keep 5% of that commission,
But the budget is our estimate on what we would actually get.
what we actually, yeah. On page 2, if you're wondering what that little $15 is, every once in a while, the DMV, for every 1,000 animal plates they sell, we get, I think, $10. So
Why
they
do we
sold
get
like,
animal plates?
because they want the money to go to the local animal hospitals for
Oh, got it.
neutering and spaying and helping them in that.
So essentially, what that equates down to is there's about 3 vehicles in town that would have those special animal plates. It's, this is what happens to a lot. I mean, anytime you get like college-specific plates, percentage goes to the schools.
So does this mean VCA does half a vasectomy or
Yeah,
something?
basically.
For $15?
No, that was just what we got off the plate, right? But
We got $15 off every plate total. And then we just pass it along to VCA.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
No.
The miscellaneous revenue is just the selling of town ornaments and books and items such. You can see our VIP investment interest. That's based on the $300,000 we have in there.
Yeah, it's not bad considering everyone else is getting 0.025% or whatever.
Also under miscellaneous is citation and accident reports, and that also does include fingerprinting fees that they collect over there. Then you can see the rental income is pretty much where it should be. And then page 3, our communications tax is also monthly. That's coming in very well. The Department of Fire Programs was the money that we received in, and we paid out to Prince William County this past, say, October. Yeah. Our law enforcement grant, we receive quarterly payments, so we've only received 2 of those. Personal property tax reimbursement is just once a year. We get that at the beginning. Car rental reimbursement is the U-Haul place we have in town. That the state sends us money for whatever he rents out for monthly. And then the railroad rolling stock we get at the beginning of the fiscal year. So that's one time.
What approximate percentage through the fiscal year are we?
I believe it's about
You said 64 the last time we met,
yeah,
a week ago?
64, 65%. And then you have the grants, pedestrian improvement, and caboose, which hasn't started yet.
That's for the decking and stuff? Is
Correct,
that what
the
it is?
decking,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, some of the revenues are just pass-through funds. They're-
Right,
yeah.
right.
And then one of the other things we want to make sure you walk away, at least from this evening, is that's one of the natures of the profit loss report. It's not an absolute perfect report from the standpoint, and like some of these percentages get skewed because of when they get collected versus when they get billed. So,
Any questions on revenue?
all right, who wants to tackle this transfer?
Okay.
Right. One of the things that you will look at in the revenue side of things is this transfer of cash reserves. This is on page 3 of that handout that we just discussed. And basically, what I want to do is I want to kind of address this issue a little bit. This is basically the cash that the town had on hand to balance out the budget for the 2015-2016 budget. The town was in a very favorable position. I'll give credit to previous councils for making sure you're set up. this council wanted to make sure we were investing some of these funds, because one of the things we were seeing is, as a jurisdiction, you want to show you're showing investment back into the community too, and you're not just holding it and everything. And so we built up quite a reserve, a very healthy reserve. So not all the cash on hand is actually needed for this fiscal year. There's a couple different reasons for that. I'm not going to belabor it too long, but essentially some of that is because the costs have exceeded more than what we originally thought it was going to run. The projects have taken, not because of any particular one reason, have taken a little bit longer than we anticipated, not because we're not moving. It's just this is the pace they move at, and I think we thought they would move faster than they actually do. It takes a while to do site plan engineering and then get it reviewed, and then you're waiting for different organizations to get reviewed. That's kind of where we're at with the site plan here at the town office. I think here probably like 2 years ago, we thought we'd be done. We'd be sitting in our new council chambers by this time. I mean, that's honestly what we thought. And we thought we were going to do it for about $500,000, and we were off. And so we're not going to need to use all those funds that we anticipated, because we're going to have to go back to the drawing board and figure out how we're going to pay for these projects. Doesn't mean we can't. Just means it's not going to happen just strictly with cash, I think, as originally thought. These funds have been used for the capital expenses in this budget. One of the things I think comes out of it, this is one of those examples of what we're trying to get across with profit loss. You look in the budget and the revenue side, you see that there's a transfer of cash reserves. Well, if we show money coming out of that on the revenue side of things, what it would do is it actually would falsify records. It looked like we're getting additional revenue. We're not. Where it's coming out of is on the expense side, and it's through our capital projects. So, for example, when we purchased the new patrol car, it came out of funds we had on hand. It came out of that because that part is balancing the budget. And then they also went to any projects. We used the funds also for cash on hand for any of the projects regarding the town center property, the Harover property, and other such capital expenses. So some of these funds were also needed this year to balance the budget. And I think you all need to understand from that standpoint. I think, and if I'm not being clear, please tell me. But essentially, when we put together this budget, it was an investment-based budget. And so you did use some of your cash on hand to help balance out this year's budget. This is kind of a one-time opportunity. And that's the big thing that we stress as we're going into next year's budget. Next year's budget will be very much going back to the standard practice of taking what you make in your general fund revenues, matching up to your expenses. And if we can't match those, then you start cutting on your expenses. If we do really well and our revenues are more than what our expenses are going to be, then we can take some money and we can push it over to capital improvements, or you put it into reserve. But it's important to understand that this year, that's what we use the transfer of cash reserves for. And when we get into some of our proposals and everything, we actually are actually probably going to be looking at what we can do to back that number off, and some of that will come out of expenses as well. The reason we want to do that is because what that does is that sets us up for next fiscal year. If we don't do that, then what happens is we can't, those funds are locked down until after the audit is complete. And they said, oh, guess what, you still have X amount of dollars in cash on hand. And then you can't apply it until after the audit is complete and adopted and set it. So we back it out in this fiscal year, and there's no like, the only time you'd have to go for a budget amendment, you get to the public hearing. We were looking at code today, and basically the only time that requires it is if we're going to increase our budget by 1%. We're dropping it down. We're not increasing it. So that's actually just a regular council action motion. So I know I kind of went on a couple tangents, didn't mean to, but I'm trying to give you the bigger picture of what this involves. The transfer of cash on hand was specifically used to help balance out this year's budget, and it was basically helped be aggressive on your capital expenditures. You know, we put in this current budget almost, I want to say it was close to $900,000 just in the town center and the Harover property alone. If you look at the transfer, it was basically about almost like 1.1 million. So it was roughly about $200,000 in additional capital expenses. Some of that also was investment in personnel that you did through your CASA. some of that was investment. And see, these are one of those things where it gets brought up. Truth is, this was never a long-term plan. This was a one-time shot that you all had because of the savings of previous councils and also the foresight of even this, your all's council. Is there any questions about that?
I just have one question. It may or may not be the time to answer. Going forward, I understand this was an investment-based budget, notwithstanding taxes, which I'm not for raising taxes, but as the town manager, where do you see us growing revenue for the town? I mean, we're kind of, well, we're not kind of, we're quickly building out. We do have a few places, but say 5 years down the road, next 10 years, where can we increase revenue without increasing taxes?
Well, to answer, Councilman Cottle, that specific question, I don't have the magic bullet answer, but what I'll tell you is I think the answer kind of lies in the continuation of investing into the town. Where you're going to get extra revenue is going to be through attracting other business and more business. If you attract more restaurants, that yields more meals tax. Raising taxes is actually something that we're actually going to be, we're not presenting, necessarily proposing that we raise taxes, but we are going to show you all a snapshot of what's been going on around us in the last several years with regard to taxes. We think that this is an issue that maybe you won't have to address this year. We're going to do our best to present you a budget that remains tax neutral. But in the years to come, the councils, future councils, are going to have to consider raising it, or it's going to be harder and harder to raise it to catch it up to what you're going to need revenue-wise. I think really kind of going back to your question, what we have to look at is continued investment in putting our resources into trying to attract new businesses here to the town to increase those revenue bases. I think to do that, though, we have to think logically, and I think one of the things that I'm hoping to bring to the table with the budget is this idea that rather than counting on any potential future revenues, like for example, if there's a restaurant that's coming in anytime soon, wink, wink, nod, nod. Rather than counting on those revenues, I think if we look to do things like invest in finishing up either the town center and going down and finishing up the park, utilizing those revenues to possibly offset any kind of debt or debt obligation that we may take on. But see, those investments are investing into the downtown, the heart here, which hopefully spawns redevelopment, and that's why I think that would be our way to start capturing. And I can tell you and assure you that Sherry does look for every opportunity we can find. If there's new bills that come out that might open the door to us to look at other ways or unique ways to collect any other revenues, we're definitely investigating in it. But there's no magic bullet answer to say this is how you garner more revenues. I think we're going to have to continue to invest in the community, and I think other than that, ultimately future councils are going to have to look at either doing a slight tax increase to help cover the increasing costs that it takes to run the town.
Right. I guess my point is there's still a fair amount of buildings that could potentially be removed to attract new businesses. And I think going forward, becoming more and more business friendly is what's going to benefit everybody. Without going into the transmission lines cutting across that piece of property up here, it's not going to help our cause. So that's all I have.
Any other questions? Thoughts? Good?
I was just going to say, that's exactly, well, somewhat what I was thinking as well. You know, business investment is how you grow. And Matt's, I think, spot on, because we've got to really turn it around, especially with the derelict and blighted areas, and see if we can get some development in those locations, particularly on the revenue enhancing side. But we'll have to do a sensitivity analysis too. when we start to do this budget, I think. Frankly, I'm glad to hear that we don't want to raise the taxes in the next fiscal year. I think that's important. I think we should commit to that as much as possible. Frankly, I've always felt that we should have an objective in the next 5 years of perhaps diminishing or even getting away or doing away with that tax as an additional enhancement to businesses in town who own their properties, as well as the residents. So, I mean, is it ambitious? Perhaps it is. And, there's an argument to be said that you have to have skin in the game, too. But, we're already paying taxes to the county. So that might be something we might want to discuss going forward over the next few years. Is there the potential or possibility of doing that? And, I would encourage that discussion. So thank you, Brian. I agree. We have to develop our business base.
Can I say something? Sure. I feel like we have to start with our own properties and cleaning them up before we can expect it of other people, as far as getting this property going. And, we need to pick something and complete it and then move on to the next thing. We can't do everything at once. But once people see that, we're investing, then they'll want to invest.
And I think, I'm just going to offer an offshoot. I think it is one of those things, it's been a slower process than I think anyone would want it. But, you all have done some investment. You did take 2 buildings that were not viable structures, and we've made them viable structures. There's one bigger caveat to finishing up that project. No one can fault anyone, especially a council, for wanting to do it.
No, I'm not saying that, but I've lived here for almost 20 years, and it's been a slow, painful, Steve knows.
So I think that's one of those.
Yeah, what you're saying is lead by example.
Yes, exactly.
And I agree with that. But also, we are trying to lead by example because we've made some decisions relative to the Harrover property.
Oh, absolutely.
We've made decisions relative to this property. Yeah, we've got a lot more to do, but there are blighted properties that really need to clean up as well.
Oh, absolutely.
We're all getting that feedback that it's not a very nice attraction to the town and wanting to come here. So, it's a mutual thing. Of course, we have to lead by example, but, we have to hold those folks that don't clean up, hold them responsible as well, in my view.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, we'll move on. Move on to the expenditures, and I'll turn it back over to Sherry.
Okay, now that we've explained some of the revenue, obviously, we don't want to go through every single line item in the budget. That wouldn't be very beneficial. But I wanted to highlight some items and explain why they may be over a little bit in the budget. And you can see in the council area, the mileage, meals, and lodging and education is over because we had a bunch of council members who did go to a VML conference.
It's a good problem to have.
It's a good problem. It was needed, and that just explains why that's over.
And the conferences are early in the fiscal year, and there's very little happening late in the fiscal year, so these will most likely come in under in the end.
What we'll most likely utilize, if there was any other specific, local conference that any of the council members want to go to, that'd be the only other place we might get some expense.
Well, we do have something in June, right? We have some planning commission training. And
Well, yeah.
Possibility, right?
Yeah, that's what I was basically referring to. But that would actually come out of planning commission, but then.
Even if it's a council
If
member?
a council member was interested, we'd probably pull from there, but it kind of counterbalances. But what I was going to say, the only other place we'd be pulling is, as we go into election year, or elections in May, we want to do another training opportunity, and that would probably come out of the convention and education. But that doesn't increase to mileage or meals, so to speak.
Would that be in this fiscal year or next fiscal year?
It would be in this fiscal year.
We would allocate the funds?
We would prefer, it would be best to hit July 1.
Okay, I got it.
Training, as opposed to waiting until after the fiscal year. Not a retreat, per se. More just a kind of a
you mean
training.
And you're talking about council-elect? Is that what you're talking?
Council.
Okay, I think that's a great idea, actually. Good.
Sorry.
Okay. Moving on to town admin, I wanted to highlight some areas where we were over. Councilwoman Edwards had asked me about workman's comp. So I wanted to get an answer on that.
Good.
Workman's comp is an annual payout to the insurance company. It's based on total payroll.
David's texting me, by the way. That's why I'm
Oh.
looking at my phone. He's like asking questions.
So what we have to do at the beginning of the year is provide an estimate. We provide an estimate now, and then we pay the premium based on the estimate. And then we provide the actuals after the year is over, and then the insurance company audits us and bills us for the difference.
Okay.
So there were some items that had happened in the previous fiscal year, with a personnel issue that
Okay.
made, pointed to that adjustment in the interim chief, and
Okay.
that's what caused that increase. The liability is also an annual payment, so there will be no more from that. Cigarette tax administration, that's a hard line item to really budget for. It depends on what comes in. And it's also a ratio of the other jurisdictions combined. It's how they come up with their admin fee.
Is that monthly, quarterly?
That is monthly.
Okay, so that will definitely.
It's on the
go over.
same document that comes in with the revenue, cigarette tax, they take their admin fee out of that, and we get the difference.
Right. Okay.
Our advertising is what it is because of legal requirements for everything we need to do as far as, public hearings and meetings and such. Our telecommunications, we under budgeted just a little bit. These are based on AT&T, the new cell phones, and our Verizon bill.
Who has cell phones? How many people?
We have 4 administrative staff that has a cell phone, and then we outfit all of the officers with a cell phone. We actually utilize it, but that comes in the public safety budget.
Right.
Actually, the long answer short is basically when we were budgeting, I had counted for the cell phones and adding 2 more to our packet. I forgot about long distance for the town, and it was simple human error. It was really what happened. That's why we under budgeted this year.
So everybody in the office has a town cell phone, no?
No. Actually, the only ones we outfit with a town cell phone is basically those who have more of a inkling to be needed when they're outside of the office. That includes the town planner, the town engineer, the Main Street coordinator, and myself.
Okay. I was just curious.
If you're basically mostly based here at the office, they even been offered, but basically felt
I
like there
didn't
was
want one.
Yeah, felt like
don't
there was
blame
not
you.
a distinctive need. So, but we do feel like there's a reason, although that comes under public safety for all the officers to have them.
But we'll take care of that in the next budgeting cycle.
Correct. It was just
Exactly.
It was oversight.
sometimes you have human error. I mean, it's really what
We're
it comes
all
down to.
human.
Well, this is the first full fiscal year we've had cell phones, so
That
we didn't have
first
any
full
history.
one, yeah.
Moving on to convention and education, a lot of that money also comes in at the beginning of the year, but there are a few items that, like Jennifer is going to go to a lead conference in March. Brian went to SEI conference at the beginning of the year, November.
Yeah, there it was in the summer.
So that contributed to a large amount of that.
Bless you.
Also, I'll be going to a conference in March as well, but I don't foresee any major additions to that line item,
Just have to watch and make sure we.
right?
We're monitoring it, but we're also we think it's very important for the continuing education
Oh,
component.
absolutely.
And so with having a budget that actually had a little bit of surplus next year, I think you'll see that go down because one of the things is I won't be going to the same kind of conferences I did last year, which was a two-week intensive managers conference. That just doesn't come up very often. And then other than that, we'll probably be sending hopefully our town treasurer to lead. But for the most part, that budget number actually will be coming down. But we kind of felt like this is the year that let's get to some of these conferences because sometimes you don't know which conferences are really going to be ones that are going to be really. You look for things that are going to be rewarding out of them. But I think we've all through any walk of life we've ever gone to a conference, you know which ones quickly are very much worth it and which ones aren't necessarily worth it. So.
I don't know who that is. Anybody?
We have-
Looks like we had a voter, late voter, but
Oh.
he turned around.
Moving on to the discretionary fund, this,
Let's look at paper.
lot of that funds were towards the plaques, the ornaments, the Employee Appreciation Week is what attributes to that. The employee picnic, so that's where that money went. And then the books, dues, and subscriptions is in, basically they're the annual fees we pay, and that usually comes in around the beginning of the year. That's for a town manager subscription, the clerk subscription, the treasurer's subscription.
So that's front-loaded.
It's kind of front-loaded,
Yeah.
yeah.
Can I ask you a question? While we're on this, and I apologize, I didn't send any questions other than from the last meeting, but what's your feeling about the wages, where we're going to end up at the end of the year? Just your gut. Sherry, Brian?
I'll tackle
That's
that.
good.
Really what it comes down to is we're kind of watching this, and this will be one of our recommendations, to wait until after the third quarter. Right now, understand, you all were able to provide a CASA. We haven't had to come back and make an adjustment as of yet. The CASA was the competitive analysis salary adjustment to get all the staff up to current competitive wages. We haven't had to look into it. I mean, it's very close. I mean, we're about 64%. We're running about 70%. But it's very close. And so what we're doing is we're kind of tracking this very closely to see if we actually are going to need to make a actual budget amendment. If we need to, then we'll address it right after the end of the third quarter. If we don't, we might just ride it out. And if we come in a little over, we think the budget can absorb any overage with that regard.
Can I ask a question? Are you still
I
going?
was just going to ask him
Okay.
about the part-time, too.
No, go ahead.
Because the part-time, I think, is, to clarify, that's Marchant and Holly.
Correct.
Essentially, that's their
Yes.
line item. Okay. And that's in really good shape.
Yes, it is. And basically, what that is that's based upon an average. There's no exact way to do it. So we base it upon an average of 20 hours a week, even though we rarely ever get to those numbers. And so that's why that number gets there. So that's one of the ways that you actually could absorb. I mean, they will slowly increase as we get close to the end, not because they're working more, but just it does get there. But that would be an area where we actually could absorb whatever overage we had.
Yeah, I'm starting to write my notes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we're hopefully we're trying to stay ahead of the game with that regard. But we are very much aware of it. It's the same issue over on the public safety side. It's the reason I don't think Sherry necessarily highlighted it, because we kind of know it. But the good news is, like I said, you were able to absorb basically a raise yet without having to dip into the general reserve, which we actually had created to add to it.
Right. Go ahead.
Can I make
I'll
a
wait.
suggestion? Can we, when staff works with boards, say the Planning Commission, the ARB, those budgets are those pay are way under. Can we not bill those hours? Do you see what I'm saying? Like, say Sherry does a meeting for the Planning Commission. Why can't we bill that to the Planning Commission?
So it's accurately reflected.
Exactly.
Yes.
Because
Brian, how
when
do
we
you-
get our pay, it shows, I get this for ARB, this for town council, this, and it's coming out of different sections. So if staff is doing that,
I don't know. Is that how it's done, or is it not being done that way?
It is not done that way. It's one of those things we certainly can. It more becomes more of a bookkeeping issue than anything. And the only reason I say that is because ultimately, at the end of it, you're just still looking at expenses and how they came
no,
out.
I understand that.
So-
But when you're looking at, different areas, truly, those expenditures are going to that board.
Right.
I mean,
Correct. The issue you run into is actually, if anything, it might even become more of like almost a bookkeeping nightmare from that standpoint. And
I don't think
I'm
it's
just-
going to be that hard.
Well-
'Cause we
well-
don't have that many meetings.
Well, that's part of what I'm getting at. As I'm saying, like in a case like Marchant's, let's just use Marchant for example. Marchant does a lot of work preparing for that meeting. If we're only going to take out what the meeting is, then it's really only 2 hours, which means now Jen, in doing payroll, has to decipher which 2 hours. How many hours was the meeting for him to keep track, because he's doing different things. I think it's not
I
something
have
you
to do it
can't
all
do.
the time at work. I have to bill it
Yeah,
to whoever.
it's not
goes
something
to,
you
so-
can't do.
Work order.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's not something we can't do. What I'm getting at is, I think at the end of the day, it's still, when we're looking at the total budget, it's still going to end up being the same numbers at the end. at the end of the expenses. But we can certainly explore that and see if there's merit
I'm
to it.
just
I don't have
saying.
any issue with it.
Well,
No,
I think we have enough staff that we can do it. And I think we need to bill who, show where the money's going, not just, I mean, that's just my opinion.
But a good point he made is that just billing for the meeting, what about all the prep work? Where should that be billed?
Same thing,
So it's properly allocated to the work at hand.
exactly.
I don't know. I mean, that's something we could take a look at in the finance committee as we start to look at the budget. Why don't we do that? And we'll get a sense of how complicated it will be.
Yeah,
Or not.
I think it'll be complicated, but I don't know that for sure.
It's not. It's not.
It's not
Councilwoman
that
Edwards, what I'm
complicated.
trying to say is like it's certainly plausible. What I'm trying to say, maybe not so eloquently, is that I think the only concern I have is at the end of the day, we're still talking all staff time, regardless if it went to the Planning Commission and the ARB and just the general administration.
You're not truly reflecting what the ARB is costing the town. You're not truly
I-
reflecting what the planning commission is costing the town.
Yes. And I think what we could do is we actually probably address that through actually the budget presentation. The budget's going to look a lot different and stuff this year. And those are the kind of things that we want to show through when we actually talk about, well, why are we budgeting these things for the ARB? Well, you got to understand, staff time goes into that. And what we can do is we actually, even though it might be up in administration where the staff time is, we can show how much staff time is dedicated to basically
But
showing
when you're
what
getting
goes into
residents who are looking
ARB.
at the budget and they don't understand that,
Yeah.
they're saying, why do we have an ARB, and why do we have this, and why do we have that? They're not seeing the true reflection of the,
And so it's something we'll certainly explore. I'm not trying to say no. I'm trying to show just some of the things that
Oh,
come
I
to my
get
mind
it.
off the top of my head.
but I'm
Yeah.
just saying, everybody out there, you have to be transparent to everybody.
Right.
To the point of it not being that complicated, it's not that complicated for businesses that are set up to work that way, whereas the town is not. Currently, they don't have the systems in place to do that, and to get those in place may be complicated, but it's still a
You're essentially
worthy,
talking like billable hours.
yeah, it's a worthy exploration.
Work order system, billable hours, whatever. Right. Matt, you had a question?
I'm saying, we're just talking after normal business hours, correct?
No. What she was saying is that if Marchant is here from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. one day working on planning commission stuff, that would be billed to the planning commission. His time that day would be billed to the planning commission. Is that correct? That's what I heard you
Yes,
say.
yeah.
But then everything he does on his salary is either working for the planning commission or the town council.
Correct.
So-
Well,
so
now you
my-
got
my
the
point
town
is-
council that, now staff has to say, okay, I worked town council issues, I worked planning commission issue, I worked ARB issues, or I worked general,
But it's not
Town
everybody,
issues.
like, it's not going to be everybody.
I'm saying, how
on
do you
staff.
differentiate that?
Well, and a lot of times
Just-
they blur, but
Okay, let's move on. 'cause-
No. Actually, this is good discussion. This is the kind of discussion I was kind
No,
of
I think-
hoping we would have, and it's good to have it. And it could be complicated, it could not be complicated. I think Curtis made a very good point, that it's not set up for it. They may not have the systems in place to do it. Although it's a doable thing, is it worth the effort? I don't know what the cost is and the
Right.
time involved in doing it, but maybe doing it makes a lot of sense.
anybody
So
who
my
works on
only-
government contracts does this day in and day out.
So my only suggestion would be, and we could go back, we'd take a look at it in the finance committee, and we report back. And, see what everybody else thinks. Just, not to cut the discussion short, but
No,
just
but-
as a suggestion. Because really, I don't think we're prepared to discuss, how we would do it
Oh,
here.
no. I'm just saying, to truly reflect what's going on,
That's a good point. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, I'm just,
Cut you guys off.
I mean, I'm just trying to understand, the town's employees are salary positions, correct?
except for part-time.
Right, and then I guess my thing is Sherry works her normal duty day, if you will. Then I can understand if she's billing extra towards the planning commission because she's here for 2 hours or whatever. But the work she does prepping for the planning commission should just
Part of her
come out of
daily.
her daily salary of what she does. That's all I'm saying.
so
And
you
then-
just have to make guidelines as to how you want it
And currently, with our part-time positions, they actually do differentiate the hours they put in to each various,
Project, right?
each
Is it by
different
project?
project. I mean, almost, it's the same thing as like what Vice Mayor Aiken referred to, or even Councilman Woods referred to. It's like, basically, it's billable hours. The only issue is, unlike a private company, we don't have a contract that's coming in directly in for that, because we're utilizing the general whole of the taxpayers. And that's what we're going to be showing this year in the budget, compared to what I think citizens and residents have seen before, is that we're going to show a little bit more about, in detail, where are taxpayer dollars going to. They're going to programs. That's how we're able to do the things that we're able to do. And that's what I'm trying to say, is I think we might be able to get there in a couple different ways, and let's explore that from that standpoint. Yeah, I just think that we don't have the quick solution tonight. So.
Well, one last comment and move on. If I understand, Kurt asked a question, I think was him, what percent of the budget? We're basically 65% through this budget cycle, right? And I'm looking, one of the concerns was that the town council is spending more money on themselves in the past. Well, if I'm looking at the budget, we're 65% through the budget cycle. The town council as a whole is about 15% under where they should be this time of year. So there's another area, if need be, where monies could be pulled from, because we're not going to spend 50% of the budget in the next 35% of the fiscal year.
That's correct.
Okay, just want to make sure.
And that's one of those things where I talk about when I say, like, can the budget absorb some overages? If we're talking about major overages, that's what we need to concentrate on with regard to any potential amendments. When we talk about can the administration line item absorb some of the overages, that's exactly what we're saying. It's like the council falls under the administration, and so if we go over, we have a couple of different line items that are way under at this point in the budget year.
And one good thing to look at
And you
is
can look at it from that
the
standpoint.
bottom line, not each individual items, but the bottom line for town administration, the bottom line for town council. That adds them all up. And those are lower than, well, I can't even read what town administration is. No, it's blurry on here.
Town's at 66%.
66.
That's not bad.
And we're at 65 right now, so we're 1% over for the entire administration.
Right.
Yes, any one item is over, but there's 3 other items under. So it's best to look at roll-ups to see, do we have a problem, rather than any little item.
Right, I understand, but there are people out there, and I'm one of those people, that I do line item budgeting. I look at every line.
No, you should. I'm
Right,
saying,
yeah, but I agree with you. At the end of the day, when you hit the total button, are we
Correct.
making budget?
correct.
Budgets are built to be fluid documents. They're not supposed to be rigid, set in stone, and so they're built, they should absorb things.
Right, we know which ones are high, and we focus on those to mitigate them. But at the end of the day, if the whole budget comes in on target, that's what counts.
Right.
Onward.
I believe we're on the second page of town admin, kind of just pretty much covered all that. I referenced why the legal bills are that high, because there's a lot of things being done this year.
Yeah,
Taxes.
there's a lot of one-off things being done that
Right.
I can't say it wasn't anticipated. Some of it was, but some of it wasn't.
Well, also, the council's been very focused on going back, and we've been doing a lot of corrective issues that have just been long overdue.
Right.
And in this day and age, you want to make sure that you're getting stuff that's sound legal. I mean, the sign ordinance has just taken us a lot longer, because from this
Well,
my
one
humble
thing-
opinion, one Supreme Court ruling sent the whole entire country into flux with regard to sign ordinances across the country. It's not just our town that's dealing with this. We just happen to be at one of those few jurisdictions that we're actually revising our sign ordinance during the course of this process. So that's just added.
And
along
one
with
thing I
other
want
ordinances.
to point out here is that town council last year we, last year, decided to reduce the budget from 120 to 90 because we thought that things would settle down. So that's on us. We decided to do that. If you look at it right here, we're heading for 120. I mean, it was what it should have been, and we got ahead of ourselves by reducing it, so.
Well, I think we were being
That's-
optimistic,
We were being optimistic, but,
euphemistically speaking.
so that's more on us than anybody else that we reduced a budget that came in at 120 last year, and we said, it'll come in less this year.
And Vice Mayor Aiken actually just commented to that the legitimate side of that, I think when you were looking at that possible reduction, I think part of it was because we thought we knew what was causing it to get to that amount. What we found
We
was, as
thought we
we've been
did.
doing a lot more heavy lifting and catching up ordinances and then also having to deal with a few other issues, we're right back where it was. So we are going to be addressing that one way or the other before the end of the third quarter, so.
So what I'm trying to say is that we, in no way do we believe the legal services bill is outrageous by any means. They're doing a lot of work, and so it is on target where it should be.
And hopefully with the one-offs, as you said before, that next year's budget,
I might disagree a little with that one, just because burned once,
okay.
might be burned again.
Aren't one-offs
Well,
next year.
Yeah.
Well, you just don't
You
know.
just don't know.
You don't know.
You can cross your fingers and pray.
But I think, keeping track of it and listing it out and kind of anticipating and doing some kind of forward thinking on it, you might be able to determine what needs to be done next year. So we may not have to increase it by that much more. That's all. That's all I was trying to get to about on the one-offs.
Okay, then you'll see the last item that is at 100% is our auditing services, and that's a one-time annual thing, so that is complete for the year. We can move on to the police department, and I will invite Chief Noble to jump in with any of these items as he sees fit. Again, we go through the insurance items, those are annual payments that are complete. They're a little
And would
over.
you say the workers' compensation, our bills went up because of issues we had with prior staff?
That would be correct.
Correct.
And would we anticipate them continuing to be at that level
That
for
was my
a
question.
period of time, like car insurance that raises because of an accident?
I think it will go up a little because of pay increases.
I'm just wondering.
I think
if
as
it
we go through a
might come
budgeting
back
process,
down.
we'd be in our better to act on the side of conservative.
Yeah,
Keep it
probably
there.
so.
Almost like when you get that accident, you think it's gonna add, and it'll eventually start driving down as long as you're not.
It may take
having
years for this
continuances.
to drive down again.
Yeah, but yeah.
I'm sorry, could you just elaborate just a little bit for my edification on what drives that? Just a little bit? What's driving that bigger number versus previous years?
Claims.
We put a couple people on,
Oh, from injuries?
no. Well, injuries possibly, but we put some people on, not leave, suspension, and they claimed workers' comp for that. I mean, if somebody claims workers' comp, it comes back to you and raises your rates.
Just like
So we had a
cars,
lot of
any insurance, any claims.
issues 2 years ago
Right.
that I think is coming back to haunt us for a couple of years, and hopefully it'll stabilize and come down again.
Is this something we do through VML or another?
No, this state of Virginia.
This is
Well,
the
actually,
state.
Workers' comp, that comes from Baker.
State
Big
corporation.
corp.
Yeah, we,
Oh,
we,
I'm sorry.
we
I thought it
switched over
was-
to Bakewar last year, and actually got
Okay.
quite a significant reduction, so.
Okay.
And again, all we can do is, we have to provide an estimate, and we don't know what's going to happen during that year, so.
Well, I think Brian said it best, Sherry, that be a little conservative in the next budget. And
Okay, also on the police department, the telecommunications, were a little bit over on that, I believe also due to the cell phones and
Not only the phones, but previously, the wireless provider for the MDCs was Sprint. And that was actually billed out of computer, internet, and website. And which is why that's actually a little bit below expectations right now. And so when there was the switch made to AT&T, apparently also the Wi-Fi adapters for the MDCs went over as part of a data plan with AT&T, and now they're billed under telecommunications also. And so a little bit of, again, under expenditure in computer, internet, and website, and a bit of an over expenditure in telecommunications because the expenses shift.
And that sort of balances, comes close.
That is actually
They also do have a lot of line items that are way under, so
Yeah,
that does
exactly.
overcompensate. Again, the general property insurance, that's an annual payment, so that's done for the year. And then their convention and education was because of some additional training and courses outside of the Rappahannock
And
Justice Academy.
again, what we're fortunate to have is a compact between the 4 academies in this region, Rappahannock, Fairfax, Prince William, and Northern Virginia. And although we are only a member of one of those, we can avail ourselves of the in-service training of all 4 of the academies. And I'm not sure there's been a great emphasis on that in the past. And in fact, even this year, there was some expenditures for training where probably had we waited and searched hard enough, we would have found it in one of the partner academies where we could have had that training for free. So a little bit more emphasis on that, I think, will help matters. Although I will say overall, $1,000 for
I was gonna say the same
that
thing.
level of training is remarkably low to begin with.
And no
It's
matter what the
remarkable.
budget item is, if it's $500 or $1,000 and you go over a couple $100, it looks,
Oh, it looks
the
worse than it
percentage
is.
looks bad, but it's not.
Right.
And I think too, you expend a little bit of money for training. As an example, getting a staff member certified in first aid and CPR, but you reap the benefits of that in future fiscal years because now you're not paying somebody on the outside to come retrain your personnel. You're doing it with somebody from the inside. And so it's a little bit upfront investment with a really nice return on investment in subsequent years.
And as Joe just mentioned, the roll-up is less than 1% over budget right now, so it's
Yeah.
in reasonable shape. And again, we're in reasonable shape without the CASA being rolled into it. I mean, the CASA is rolled into it, but not giving them the money for the CASA. So in both cases, we're in actually decent shape because of that.
Well, plus you look at Officer O'Neill saving that baby's life. I mean, that baby's definitely worth $479. So one life, I mean, what do you put on one life? So I think for the safety of our citizens, and there's been other instances, the gentleman with the snow shoveling, so anything we can do to help the people out there, $479 is pittance.
Okay. The only other items that are slightly over are the uniforms and supplies, and these are attributed to the ballistic vest and uniforms. It also includes uniform cleanings and boots and supplies as well. The capital outlay is, as you can see, the new cruiser and outfitting, and then the speed indicator signs are in that as well.
Yeah, it's only 10% above, but the cruiser's one-time expense, and
Right.
that was the majority of it. So we're,
And I would actually probably recommend deferring on buying a third speed monitoring sign, only because we are predicted to be so over on wages and salaries that I feel a strong obligation to start looking in other areas of what I would describe more as either the CIP or the operation and maintenance portion of the budget to save money. And,
we'll put it off till June to see where we really stand.
Indeed. Sorry. Well, just one of the other general items I was going to say, too, because I again feel an obligation to address salaries and wages because they are pretty far over 65% now, is, again, understanding and reaffirming the fact that in FY16, the base budget was developed on the basis of 2,080 hours a year.
Right.
Well, the officers work 2,184 hours a year, so we're starting a little bit of hole there too. And I'm a strong advocate that if you have a defined benefit, you should budget for the defined benefit. And one of those defined benefits that this town has is holiday pay, and yet we don't budget for it. And that actually, when you measure out how much we incur in costs for holiday pay, it almost equals the entire budget for overtime. And so, again, when you consider the fact that hasn't been a separate line item in the budget, I'm actually kind of impressed that we are where we're at, given that is about a $44,000 hole that you start out in. Again, knowing these benefits are defined, they're going to happen.
Next year, is holiday pay going to be a defined item?
That was my recommendation.
Or will it roll into regular salary?
Actually, it would be a matter of how you want to represent it in the budget. I actually, again, almost what Councilmember Edwards is suggesting, believe that it is a great way to keep the public educated on salaries and wages if it is a separate line item in the budget. And it explains a little bit about why and how you pay your employees. Not that it has to be that way. You certainly could say, okay, well, base salaries and wages is going to be increased by $10,000 for holiday pay, and do that. But again, I do like the concept of representing in some decent detail what you're expending money on for wages and salaries.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, just to actually jump on that, and stuff, those are going to be included into next year's fiscal budget when you actually do see it. With regard to the speed indicator signs, I think one of the other things, I would actually tend to agree with Chief Noble, but not only that, I almost would rather hold off till we could go ahead and purchase 2 additional signs so you actually have them on bookends. If it's the most adequate place would be on Jefferson Street. You have some capital improvements taking place on Jefferson Street, so it wouldn't make sense to install it right now because we don't feel like the sidewalks are going to be included, and that's going to be the southbound lane where you'd want to put it.
You can't go very fast down there because all the potholes.
That's the south end of Jefferson Street. I'm actually referring to coming in from the north, but yes, that's our deterrent at this point for the calming. It's our calming effort. But I'm actually hoping as we start moving forward, that's going to be our next clear direction. But I think it would be better if we could do 2 than as opposed to just installing 1.
All right.
Any other questions on public safety?
Nope.
As we move into public works, there are,
512%.
yeah,
January or
that
February?
would be our January snowstorm. Of course, our landscaping is also over as well because we've had additional landscaping work done above and beyond the.
Yeah. And once again, it's one of those things you can't predict. We actually had a long mowing season. Spring, even though I think last year's groundhog didn't see a shadow or whatever the case may be and stuff, and it was supposed to be a long winter. We actually started mowing about mid-April, and we were mowing through October. I mean, our normal mowing season normally goes from May through about September. So I think we were mowing the week before Halloween.
Yeah. Our electrical services, as you can see there, is slightly over. It's been a very cold winter. I think the electric bill we just got for the town hall building almost doubled from last month. So, also something you can't really predict.
What does capital outlay machinery equipment, $0 spent, entail?
That was a couple of different projects. One I remember, Sherry, I might need your help on this one, but if I'm not mistaken, I think it had to do with Washington Street beautification. That included like benches, trash cans, some pedestrian improvements, and also don't believe it included the crosswalk improvements. But there was about 3 different items that were in capital outlay.
So that's
That-
dedicated.
So
That's
it's
dedicated funds?
it's dedicated, but keep in mind, your capital improvements plan is just that. It's a plan. It's not something you always can get to. We've actually been looking at that very
But if you
closely.
don't use that money, that's supposed to go back to capital?
Well, and yeah, it could. If we could also allocate it. Remember, our capital is in our budget. It's in
Yeah.
this fiscal budget. Now, next year, you wouldn't have that luxury because well, we're getting there slowly but
I'm
surely.
not
We're
saying
getting
we
there.
should
But
use it for the January
we're
snowstorms,
looking
but
at
I was just curious.
yeah.
Can we?
Speaking-
It's a possibility.
Speaking of the crosswalk improvements, the sign on Washington, right by Madison Street, seems to have disappeared.
And we put them over at the PD because of snow.
Gotcha.
And once we
That's what I
feel
figured.
comfortable and no more snow plows, we'll put them back in.
Okay, perfect.
I thought you were talking about one on a pole. I'm like.
No,
No, the crosswalk.
Yeah,
The crosswalk
we
signs.
pulled those up because if not, they would have been a snowbank. So
perfect.
Yeah, kind of anticipated that.
And we are getting ready also to go into the spring, so the landscaping
Yeah.
is going to go up a little bit more. But the bottom line is holding 64%.
Just want to throw something out there. Yeah, and that's a good point. It's going to go up. Spring is coming. Any other thoughts about trying to do some adopt programs for the town? You know, we had those folks that wanted to do, I think it was the flower beds and what have you. Maybe we should take a look at that as a way of trying to save some money on the landscaping side.
School groups at the high school or the club.
Like a 4-H,
For the
whatever.
planters and things like that.
I don't know.
I did float the idea when the I think the Dominion Valley's Flower Club, they actually have come the last couple of years. I might have the organization mixed up. I know it's a gardening club, and they've been so gracious to decorate the town hall the last couple of years, and I actually did float the idea about would they be interested in maybe taking on our large-size planters and kind of adopting them, or actually reaching out to other gardening clubs and see if they would want to do it on some kind of rotational basis. That's something I think would be really interesting and actually probably a lot of fun to look into. I think what I would say is experience, and also from talking to other towns, municipalities. The issue is when you do get into a volunteer basis, you lose a little bit of accountability sometimes. Not all the time. Yeah, so I'm trying to be gracious, but genuine. But really, what it comes down to is that would be one of those things where you got to understand you're working with volunteers at that point. So if it's not getting done quite the way that the town wants it to get done, you don't really have any way to help
There's lots of different.
materialize it.
You have Boy Scouts, you have Girl Scouts, you have, Heritage Hunt is over here, you have Dominion Valley, you have all these, different places. I'm sure we have to be able to,
And, some business owners do a great job themselves, maybe have a contest or something like that, but some way of incentivizing them to,
church over here would be happy to do the one that's in front of there,
yeah.
One of the other things Chief Noble brought up was, and that I've seen other jurisdictions, I've actually worked at jurisdictions that have taken advantage of workforce development programs or workforce programs through the local jails. And you often find people who are very skilled, sometimes aren't as much, but they can be hard workers. And that is something that we would probably explore. We're going to be exploring some issues with Public Works, and we're going to have to address that through the budget. And we'll be working with the Public Works Committee, or Public Facilities Committee, as it will, to kind of discuss this.
people set for here to do community service as disposition.
Occasionally,
Yeah.
occasionally, not as much as I probably actually would expect we get more, but we do get occasionally. We've put a couple, but once again, it's not something it's on a consistent basis.
Do the high schools still require community service to
They do.
graduate?
Yes, they do.
There's always a bunch of kids running around at the last minute trying to get their graduation time.
Yep.
Could happen. Okay, the only other item left, Public Works, is you'll see the real estate taxes. Those are paid for the year. Nothing else will be due till July. Any questions on Public Works?
Nope.
We have left Parks and Recs and everything else, which includes Planning Commission, ARB. You'll see the museum, a little bit over on the phones and the mileage, but their bottom line is 56%, so.
Yeah, I mean, this whole page looks good. I mean, 56%, 34%, 32%. I mean, it's all,
And the general obligation bond is now paid through the year, so nothing will be due till next August, or this coming August. So that's next fiscal year. Any questions on those? And all that's left is our capital. There's really not a whole lot to report there. You can see the numbers. We moved to the $12,925 under the Hare-Over Master Plan there because that was a cleanup of the property that Genesis did. So we considered that being part of the construction phase. Other than that, they're looking pretty good as well. Any questions on those? Nope.
Just for Brian, on the Town Center Master Plan,
Yes.
are you still anticipating maybe April, maybe May?
I have construction bid docs today, and I actually will be advertising within the week, and we hope to get that. I've actually been working with our town attorney. We've finally gotten the draft lease for our potential tenants. The only thing I'm letting them know
potential tenants for what?
for the
PD.
current
Okay.
PD.
All right.
We kind of have a couple moving pieces. We are going to, really want to include some incentives for early delivery for the construction phase. We'll be knowing a lot more about that once we get the bid process out. We'll do a sealed bid process for the construction. All the plans are done. The permit process is already underway as well. So we're moving forward. We're a little bit behind schedule, but we're moving forward.
We can catch up.
Yeah,
It's fine.
that's the hope. The goal right now is, originally we were hoping to have them in by April. We're now looking at probably realistically moving pretty quickly and swiftly, probably mid-May.
All right, I only ask you from the budget perspective, because
Yeah,
that 435 is going to get drawn down.
it will.
Okay.
Brian, we're at 6.72% of the Hare-Over Master Plan, so we still have 289, 162.50 in concrete funds to go towards that project, correct?
You do. I think one of the things that logically the council has to realize is, I think setting aside some funds to make that a public space is important. But I think rather than diving in and really starting putting some construction dollars, the problem we're going to run into is almost no matter what we go for, if it's just to put up the pavilion, we're going to run into needing a site plan. If we want to just work on trails, you're going to need the site plan. Our next approach would be actually following the same process we did here, which seems like, well, this is dragged out. Well, this is a lot more complicated of a site. I mean, we're talking about a building, we're talking about impervious cover already. What our next best case would be, I'd recommend, and what I'm going to be recommending to you all is taking some of those funds, going out and starting the engineering design. Because if we design it all at once, now it's just a matter of just moving on the construction. But at the same time, hearing the desire of the council and understanding that desire, I think there's lots of ways that we can take the current property and make it feel very open to the public. I think we need to move forward with having a naming of the park contest. I think we need to move forward with putting some benches and picnic tables out there. I think one of the biggest things we got to strike with iron hot is continue to work with our prospective buyer. We have the public hearing at this March's meeting. Once that's done, he's on his way to start working on relocating that property. Once that gets done, we can then clean up that hill. We're going to have to. We don't want to leave a big foundation hole, up there. So we're going to have to do some cleanup work, which is what these funds are going to be able to take. And so I think there's lots of ways we can make that very much a public, open space, start getting people welcoming them and using it, and then also utilizing the funds that you set aside to start saying, okay, we got a bigger picture here, and we got to get going on that. Because if we just try to do one piece at a time, you're going to have to design for that one piece, and they're always going to be running it. The engineers and the designers are always going to be running the same. How does that fit within the overall scope of the project?
I mean, I get all that, and I think the citizens get that too, but we've made a lot of progress. We need to see some tangible results out there. Because this project has been talked about for a decade or more. So, even removing that one building, provided it goes through, filling in the foundation, people driving by a new park name or whatever, people can at least say, well, yeah, they're making progress. Right. They're not looking for the finished product. They just want to know we're actually serious about doing what we're doing, because the town's been guilty of making promises and not delivering.
And Councilman Cottle, I'm prepared to basically say this is what I've been kind of thinking. We haven't really gotten a chance to really talk about this. I think I don't want to get into a long, drawn-out discussion, but one of the things I want to actually recommend when I present the budget is actually I want to see us get some completion. But the issue is that I think you're so far along on this project, and I understand exactly the park has a lot of tangible reward for the citizens. But I think there's a lot of tangible reward here. What I really want to encourage us to do is actually look at other financing options that we can do them both. And then basically say, let's live off what we're making now, knowing that we're investing in the community. We know that there's going to be some future revenues, but we don't want to count on those revenues, and I can't reflect that. I don't think I can propose to reflect that in the budget this year because we don't know what it's going to yield. But if we can say, let's plan on saying, let's live off what we're making now and using any additional future revenues to go pay off the debt service. You actually, we're talking to a lot of jurisdictions through the Town Association or Northern Virginia, and they've got some renovation projects going on. And one of the projects I know one of our local jurisdictions working on is a community center. And they told us what the budget, they were talking about what the budget was for it. I had to lean over to the mayor and actually tell him, that would build all of our projects plus give us some infrastructure. And because for one thing, we have a luxury that most jurisdictions don't have. We don't have any infrastructure from the standpoint of pipes and water and sewer lines. We did, our budget would look vast different. So we actually have that luxury. So that's actually where I want to go, because I hear what you're all saying. I actually want to see us get completion on both these projects and really just kind of make this town really start thriving. And I think we can do it by making sound financial decisions and being fiscally and feasibly passive-aggressive.
Right. Just going back to my initial question, we still have $289,162.50 to put towards that project.
Right.
Okay, that's all I need to know. Thanks.
Yeah. All right. Any other questions on capital expenses? Okay, well, we're nearing the end here, I promise. Let's talk a little bit about solutions and proposals. Basically, what the staff is going to do, and a lot of this you already heard, so I'm just going to go through this fairly quickly. We're basically recommending that we address any of the line items that will exceed the budgeted amount within the slate of the current budget through slate of budget amendments after the third quarter. We want to wait until after the third quarter because it gives us a better chance. Also, if you start just trying to catch everyone up now, it's almost what's the saying? It's almost like trying to arrange deck chairs on the Titanic. We could catch everything up, but we might get hit by something in June that we're not anticipating. So we'd almost rather wait until after the third quarter, give it our best bet, and then we think we're going to try to set it up so the budget can absorb any other overage. That's what has kind of been done in the past. The Finance Committee will continue to be advised and be part of the recommendations as we move forward. We'll be bringing these to the council probably sometime April, May, somewhere around there. The annual fixed costs, which have been expended, but only will only be addressed if the overall line item cannot be absorbed in the added expense. Meaning that if it's already over, like the workers' comp, we know that those are over. Sherry, can you give me an example of something that's fixed?
Any insurance and the audit.
Yeah, the audit, it's over. We're not going to address those. We think we can absorb those within. We're only going to look at the ones that we feel are in serious concern, and that we're watching very closely. With regard to that, also we're going to look very closely at potentially lowering the total budgeted amount for the fiscal year by not transferring as much cash on hand and removing some of the unused funds out of the capital expenses. The only reason to do that is basically so that way it sets us up for next fiscal year to be able to move forward. Doesn't mean that we're not doing anything. What it actually does, it actually gives us a little bit more freedom to move faster come the next fiscal
So
year.
you're talking about moving funds out of Harover and out of town master plan
That we don't anticipate
that we
being
don't
able to
anticipate
spend.
spending by June,
Correct.
so that in July, we could tap them, because if we don't do that, then we have to wait for the
The audit.
audit, which could be September, October, November, before it's completed, and that money is tied up and we can't touch it.
Correct.
Okay.
So actually, by doing this, what it does, it actually allows us to move faster, because one of the things we'll be doing in next year's fiscal budget is we're going to set up a general fund budget, and we're going to set up a capital budget. And as long as we are meeting our fiscal policies, which say 30% of our general fund, anything that's left over, which should still be a fairly significant amount, could be used for capital expenditures. If we don't pull that out of this year's budget, the problem we have is exactly as Vice Mayor said, is you can't touch it until after the audit has said that you have those additional funds.
Well, after the council accepts the audit, correct?
Correct. Correct. You'd have to accept the audit, and then you could actually say, well, we do have additional funds, where we're going to put them. And I actually addressed my last point on this. Our next steps, basically, continuing what I said, staff will work with Finance Committee to prepare third quarter budget amendments. Staff will also continue to work with Finance and Council to further our financial reporting efforts. One of the things that both Sherry and I wanted to get across to the council this evening is, there are limitations to just this report. This report is it's a profit loss statement. That's what it is. It doesn't always tell the full picture or the full story. And so one of the things we'll continue to do is we'll look at other ways that we can possibly work. It's not going to happen probably within the next month or so, but what I'm saying is we move forward in our budgeting processes. We're going to move forward to how we report this to you all. One of the things that we actually start looking at, which has actually become a rapidly growing trend, is going with an organization called OpenGov. OpenGov really kind of provides financial records to the public as a means of increasing transparency. It also helps us produce some additional reports. They can work within the confines of what we currently use for our accounting, which is QuickBooks. We're small. Our books are not to a point where we need a very aggressive accounting software. We've been down that road. We basically were advised, and we actually came to the conclusion that that's not what we needed, at least not at this time. One of the things I'll tell you, the reason we don't is because we don't have utilities to bill. We only do one set of billing a year, and that's our real estate taxes. And we get help from Prince William County with the assessments. We just have to basically produce the bills. Other than that, it's a business license, and that's actually more done through a letter than anything. So we don't do a whole lot of billing, and we don't have a whole lot of, the revenues we get in is not like day-to-day operations. So that's one of the things that we are going to be looking into.
Bernie's got a question.
Yes. Vice Mayor.
What sort of additional reporting OpenGov allows you to do that is above and beyond just putting our profit and loss budget on our website?
I think what it is they actually help you really kind of drill down further than what I think our QuickBooks is. Now, I'm not saying I'm sold on doing this yet. We're actually just starting to look at it as a staff. I've actually tasked, I've sat through a presentation over a conference call. I've asked both our treasurer and our town clerk to go through the same and give me kind of a report back. with regard to what their thoughts are. I do know other colleagues of mine who work with Hump and Gov. I anticipate talking to them a little bit more in detail. But what I think what they can do, what it does, it kind of drills down a little bit more into the profit law. So take what the reports that we can generate and basically can put it into bar graphs, charts, and stuff that we don't have quite the capacity to do in QuickBooks.
What sort of fees are there?
The fees that are involved is roughly an annual fee. The initial cost I got was roughly around $3,000 a year. But this is all web-based. We don't have to do any of the hosting. It's basically a link right off our website. They do all the hosting's all cloud-based and everything. And there's some actually unique applications of it. And you can expand it without necessarily changing that.
Right. I'd be interested in seeing what it offers for $3,000 that we can't achieve with our small town, that we can just post some things on our website, of these things. And people can come in. We're small enough, people can come in and ask questions.
Well, and I think that's kind of like
So
that's what we're having to balance out when we make a decision. I will tell you, that's the annual fee. There is a setup fee, but I've already made it I mentioned to them that the annual fee is plausible. The setup fee we would need to work on. So, and there's
Any other communities that you can share that do this right now?
Town of Ashland, Virginia, currently does this. I believe the town of Purcellville, Loudoun County is also in it. I can get the council list. I'll include in my next manager's review.
Okay. Or we can talk about it at the next.
We'll talk about it next
meeting.
finance. We'll go look at some of the sites and everything. Okay. Yes. Humpandgov.com. Any other questions with regard to this year's fiscal budget? And then we're going to quickly go through. I do promise it'll be quick.
Okay.
We're on page 20. There's only 22 pages.
This is
What
looking
about all
good.
the backup material?
Any other questions?
No?
Okay. I'm not even going to go through this. I'm going to let you just take this home and look at it in your spare time. Staff, this is the projected revenues for the upcoming fiscal 2016-2017. I'll just give you the brief synopsis. This is the numbers that basically we worked on in-house. We basically took our last 5 years of revenues, basically through that and also watching trends. That's how we came up to these. We actually feel like these are conservative but solid numbers. They're none that are, I think, are far-reaching. Actually, we even lowered some. It's kind of a combination of meaning both our town treasurer and our town clerk have years of experience of watching these, and we actually are normally pretty on track with our revenues usually. So I feel very confident about these numbers. I'm not going to tell you that they won't change between now and the time we present the budget, or even before you all adopted that budget. But we feel like they're fairly on track. If you'd like to see how we got to those, we'll be happy to sit down with you. We're in the process right now of working on expenditures for the upcoming fiscal budget. I've been working with staff to get recommendations. I've already received public safety, and then we'll be working administratively to address the other ones, the other line items. What the plan is to present the budget to finance in March. In March, staff will be working to put together a whole entire budget presentation, which will look vastly different than what the budget has looked like in years past. I'm hoping to make the presentation of the budget to council at the April meeting. That's what I'm intending on doing. Staff will present the budget to the council, and then it'll be your all's to review and discuss it. What I'm hoping to is basically leave you all with a series of questions or discussions for you all to have to basically work through. We will present to you all the facts. We'll most likely present a budget that comes in, hopefully tax neutral, but we want to show you, well, what does it look like if you take on the assessments, or what does it look like if, you may need to consider a raise in taxes in years to come, and what would that look like? What does that difference make? What have previous jurisdictions done? What have the jurisdictions around us been doing? Those are the kind of things we're hoping to present to you. There'll be a couple other questions. Other than that, for the most part, we anticipate other tax rates pretty much remaining the same. We're going to try to work with what we anticipate we're bringing in. A few changes.
Quick question.
Yes.
The projected budget has a revenue of 1.973 million.
That's correct.
How does that reflect this year's income? Is it more or less?
Good question. We should look.
I think it's a little less.
Right now, at 65%, we've pulled in 1.3. So I'd say we're a little bit.
Well, not what we pulled in,
What
but
we
what we
budgeted.
budgeted for.
I think
Now,
it's less. I think it's less.
Yeah.
It's
I'm
hard to
doing the math
tell
in my
because
head,
we've
right?
got things in here that have been taken out.
Well, and a good
Could it
bit of
be
that,
about-
those revenues.
Could it be roughly 300, 400 less?
Are you talking about the
Compared to
1.9?
this year.
Compared to last year's budget?
Yeah.
Last year's budget was 3.4, but that
No.
included
But
about
back out the
1.1.
If you back out, if you do it line item by line item, my question is, and we can't do it right now, but is our total revenue above or below what our total revenue expected this year? Do we have a problem or not, is my first question.
We'd have to run the numbers.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah, get
And
back
that's
to you
okay.
on
You
I'll
run
run off
them
the
and
top of my head.
just send out an email
yeah.
that last year's 2015, 2016 projected budget was 1.957 or something, and this shows us $20,000 more than than last year, or maybe it's 50,000 less. Who knows?
We'll get that number.
Okay.
We'll
It's-
go through that at the,
At the next meeting.
Well, we can do that too.
Yeah. We'll get that number to you. I mean,
It's
that's,
just early
rather
on.
than trying to,
Early on, I'd like to know, do we have a significant problem or not with the revenue?
what I would tend to tell you is I feel a little bit more solid probably about this number than we did going into last year's number, because I think this is a lot more based upon what we've been.
Agreed.
So, I mean, we do take into account, like there's escalators on some of our rents and for some of our tenants. You know, obviously you don't always know, you know, their future plans. But we will get that number too. As mentioned earlier this evening, the general fund budget will be separated from the capital fund budget. The budget presentation will include, and when I say this, I'm not talking we're going to present this all to you, but the presentation itself will include narratives and the details of proposed expenditures. It will actually break down what are we spending on these various expenditures, and what does it take to basically operate the town of Haymarket. This will actually officially begin our transition from a traditional line item budget per se into a program-based budget. We want to show what we're paying for programs and where does taxpayers' dollars actually go to. And that's going to be our goal for this year.
Okay.
That's all I have.
Don't worry about that right now. We'll have plenty of time to go through. Anybody have any questions or comments?
If there's anything you think of later that maybe you forgot to ask, by all means, just email me. I'm happy to get you an answer.
I just want to say thank you, Brian and Sherry and Chief Noble. I appreciate the fact that we're able to get together and do this. And we should be doing this every year. Mid-year review is good, getting everybody on the same page. So I really appreciate the fact that you put this all together. There's a lot of work here. So thank you.
Good.
And it's under 2 hours.
Motion to adjourn?
Do I hear a second?
Matt wants to stay.
no.
Meeting adjourned.
All right.